You know those moments when you're just living your life, thinking everything's figured out, and then boom, everything changes in a single night? Yeah, that was me last spring. I was 22, fresh out of college, working this entry-level marketing job that barely paid my rent, but I was happy. Or at least I thought I was happy. I had this boyfriend, Jake. We'd been together for like 8 months, and he was safe, Predictable. The kind of guy who always ordered the same thing at restaurants and never forgot to text me good morning. My family loved him, especially my mom, who kept dropping not-so-subtle hints about how stable he was and how I should appreciate a good man when I found one. But here's the thing about safe. Sometimes it feels more like settling than choosing. Don't get me wrong, Jake was sweet. He really was. But when I kissed him, I never felt those butterflies everyone talks about. When he held my hand, it was nice, but it didn't make my heart race. I kept telling myself that maybe that's what real love was supposed to feel like, comfortable, easy, without all the drama and intensity you see in movies. My older sister Emma always said I watched too many rom-coms and had unrealistic expectations. Maybe she was right. The night that changed everything started so ordinarily. My parents were hosting one of their famous family dinners, the kind where my mom spends 3 days cooking enough food to feed a small army, and everyone in our extended family shows up with their latest life updates and unsolicited advice. My dad had recently gotten promoted to senior partner at his law firm, which was huge for him. He'd worked his ass off for 20 years to get there, and honestly, we were all so proud. But with the promotion came this whole new social circle. Important clients, other partners, people who moved in circles we'd never really been part of before. That's when my mom mentioned that Dad's new business partner, Richard Matthews, would be joining us for dinner. She said it so casually, like it was no big deal, but I could tell she was nervous. She kept adjusting the flowers on the dining room table and asking me if I thought the good china was too much. Richard was apparently this big shot in the legal world, someone my dad really wanted to impress. And he was bringing his son. His son's around your age, Mom had said, giving me that look. You know the one. He just finished law school at Harvard. Very accomplished young man. I rolled my eyes so hard, I practically gave myself a headache. The last thing I wanted was to be set up with some pretentious Harvard boy who probably wore boat shoes unironically and talked about his trust fund at parties. But family dinner was family dinner, and I'd learned long ago that resistance was futile when my mother had made up her mind about something. Jake arrived first, of course, punctual as always, carrying a bottle of wine that he'd clearly Googled to make sure it was appropriate. He kissed my cheek and complimented my dress, this navy blue thing I'd bought on sale at Target, but that somehow looked more expensive than it was. You look beautiful, he said, and I smiled and thanked him, but my mind was already elsewhere, dreading the evening ahead. My stomach was doing these weird little flips, but I chalked it up to anxiety about meeting my dad's important business partner. I wanted everything to go well for Dad. He'd worked so hard to get where he was, and this partnership meant everything to him. The pressure was real, Like, what if I said something stupid? What if I embarrassed him in front of these important people? When the doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, my heart started beating faster. I could hear my dad's voice in the hallway, suddenly more formal than usual, saying things like, "So wonderful to have you in our home," and "Please, come in, come in." Then there were footsteps, and my mom was smoothing her hair one last time before walking toward the front door to greet our guests. And then I saw him. Oh my God. I wish I could explain to you what happened in that moment, but I don't think there are words for it. Have you ever had one of those moments where time just stops? Where everything else fades away, and there's just this one person standing there, and suddenly you can't breathe properly. That's what happened when I first saw Daniel Matthews. He was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and these incredible green eyes that seemed to see right through me. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, nothing fancy, but somehow he looked more put together than guys who spent hours getting ready. There was something about the way he carried himself, this quiet confidence that wasn't arrogant but just assured. Like he knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But it wasn't just how he looked. It was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. The way he smiled when my parents introduced themselves, genuine and warm. The way he shook my dad's hand and looked him in the eye. The way he complimented my mom on how beautiful our home was, and you could tell he actually meant it. There was this energy about him, this presence that just filled the room. And then his eyes met mine, and I swear to God, everything just clicked into place. Like puzzle pieces finding each other. He smiled, not that polite, social smile you give to strangers, but this real, intimate smile that made me feel like we were sharing some kind of secret. "You must be the daughter I've heard so much about," he said, and his voice was warm and deep and did things to my insides that I definitely should not have been feeling while standing next to my boyfriend. That's when I realized Jake was still holding my hand, and I felt this wave of guilt crash over me. What was wrong with me? I had a boyfriend. A good boyfriend who loved me and treated me well. And here I was, practically melting over some guy I'd met 30 seconds ago. But when Daniel Matthews looked at me, I felt more alive than I had in months. Dinner was torture in the most exquisite way possible. Mom had outdone herself. Pot roast with all the fixings, homemade dinner rolls, green bean casserole, the works. The dining room table looked like something out of a magazine, with the good china and crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. Dad was in his element, talking business with Richard, who turned out to be this distinguished older man with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes. You could see where Daniel got his charm from. I tried so hard to focus on being a good girlfriend, to pay attention to Jake's stories about his job at the insurance company, to laugh at his jokes and hold his hand under the table. But every time Daniel spoke, my attention snapped to him like a magnet. He had this way of talking that drew you in. He was smart, obviously, but not in that pretentious way I'd expected. He asked thoughtful questions, really listened to the answers, and had this incredible ability to make everyone at the table feel heard and important. "So, Daniel," my mom said, passing him the rolls, "your father tells us you just graduated from Harvard Law. That must have been quite an experience." I internally cringed, waiting for the inevitable humble brag about Ivy League life, but Daniel just smiled and said, "It was challenging, but honestly, the best part was the people I met. There's something about being surrounded by people who are all working towards something bigger than themselves that's really inspiring." Jake jumped in then, trying to be part of the conversation. "Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I went state, so it's probably different, but college was great for networking." There was something about the way he said it that made me wince internally. Not because there was anything wrong with going to state, hell, I went to state too, but because he said it like he was trying to prove something. Like he was measuring himself against Daniel and coming up short. Daniel, to his credit, didn't make Jake feel small. Instead, he turned to him with genuine interest and said, "What did you study? And what are you doing now?" When Jake explained about his business degree and his job in insurance, Daniel nodded thoughtfully and asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually listening. It was kind, and it made my heart do this stupid fluttering thing that I tried desperately to ignore. But here's where things got complicated. As the evening went on, I started to notice the subtle dynamics at play. Richard Matthews was clearly wealthy, like seriously wealthy. The kind of wealthy where you don't talk about money because you have so much of it that it's just assumed. His watch probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Daniel had mentioned traveling to Europe last summer for fun, and when my dad asked about law school, it became clear that money had never been an obstacle for Daniel's education. Meanwhile, Jake was getting quieter and quieter. I could see him taking it all in. The casual mentions of expensive restaurants and ski trips, the way Daniel talked about considering job offers from prestigious firms like he had the luxury of being picky. The contrast was stark, and I could feel Jake shrinking beside me. It broke my heart, honestly. Not because I cared about money, I didn't, not really, but because I could see how it made Jake feel less than, and that wasn't fair to him. "What about you?" Daniel asked me suddenly, and I realized I'd been lost in thought. "Your dad mentioned you're working in marketing? That must be exciting." The way he looked at me when he asked made my skin feel warm all over. Like, he wasn't just making polite conversation, but genuinely wanted to know about my life. "Oh, it's nothing exciting," I started to say, but he interrupted me. "I doubt that. Tell me about it. What kind of marketing? What do you love about it?" And suddenly I found myself talking about my work in a way I never had before, explaining the campaigns I'd worked on, the creative challenges, the satisfaction of seeing an idea come to life. He listened intently, asked smart questions, and made me feel like what I was doing actually mattered. When I finished, I realized the whole table had been listening, and I felt this flush of embarrassment mixed with something else. Pride. Maybe? Like I'd been seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. That's when Jake squeezed my hand and said, "She's being modest. It's just entry-level stuff, but she's working her way up." He meant it to be supportive, I know he did, but something about the way he said just entry-level stuff made me feel small. And the look Daniel gave me then, like he could see right through to how that comment had stung, made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. After dinner, Dad suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert. Mom had made her famous apple pie, and the smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the house. Jake immediately volunteered to help clear the table. He was always good about stuff like that, and I started to follow him into the kitchen when Daniel appeared beside me. "Let me help," he said, reaching for the stack of plates I was carrying. Our fingers brushed as he took them from me, and I swear it was like touching a live wire. This jolt of electricity shot through me, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, I think he felt it too. We stood there for just a moment, too close, staring at each other, and I could smell his cologne, something clean and masculine that made me want to lean closer. "Thanks," I managed to whisper, and he smiled that smile again, the one that made me forget my own name. In the kitchen, it was chaos in the best way. Mom was fussing over the coffee, Jake was loading the dishwasher with military precision, and Daniel was asking thoughtful questions about the pie recipe, charming my mother completely. But every so often, our eyes would meet across the room, and I'd feel that same electric jolt all over again. "Your family is wonderful," Daniel said to me quietly while Jake was explaining something to my dad about insurance policies. We were standing by the window, and the evening light was hitting his face in this way that made him look almost ethereal. "You're really lucky to have this." "Yeah, they're pretty great," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about your family? Besides your dad, I mean." His expression changed slightly, became more guarded. "It's just me and Dad, mostly. My mom died when I was 15. The way he said it was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the old pain underneath. Dad threw himself into work after that, and I threw myself into school. We're close, but we're both pretty independent." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I couldn't imagine losing my mom at that age. That must have been incredibly hard. "It was," he said simply, "but it taught me not to take the good things for granted. Nights like this, with family, with warmth and laughter, and love filling up a house, that's precious. Not everyone gets this." The way he looked at me when he said it made my heart race. There was something in his eyes, something intense and vulnerable that made me feel like we were the only two people in the world. I opened my mouth to say something. I don't know, when Jake appeared at my elbow. "Hey babe, your mom wants to know if you want ice cream with your pie," he said, slipping his arm around my waist possessively. I felt Daniel take a small step back, the moment broken, and I nodded mutely at Jake. But as we walked back into the living room, I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, and I knew that whatever was happening between us wasn't going away just because my boyfriend was standing right there. If anything, the contrast between Jake's casual familiarity and Daniel's intense focus made everything more complicated. Jake held my hand like he owned it, like it was his right. But when Daniel looked at me, it felt like a choice, like he was asking permission to see me, really see me. We settled back into the living room, Jake and I on the couch, Daniel in the armchair across from us. The conversation flowed around topics like politics, travel, books we'd read recently. Daniel had traveled all over Europe and could speak conversationally in French and Italian. He'd read authors I'd never heard of, but wanted to immediately. He had opinions about art and music and food that were informed but not pretentious. Every story he told, every observation he made, just made him more fascinating. Jake tried to keep up, but it was becoming increasingly clear that we were operating in different leagues. Not better or worse, necessarily, just different. Daniel came from a world of possibilities that Jake and I could barely imagine. When Daniel talked about popping over to London for a weekend, or that little place in Tuscany, it wasn't bragging, it was just his reality. And sitting there listening to him, I felt this hunger growing inside me. Not just for him, though God knows that was there too, but for the life he represented. For adventure and culture and experiences beyond anything I'd ever considered possible. I kept stealing glances at him throughout the evening, and more often than not, I'd catch him looking back. There was this tension building between us, this electric current that I was sure everyone else could feel too. But if they did, no one said anything. The adults were too caught up in their own conversations about business and politics, and Jake was too focused on trying to impress Daniel's father to notice the way Daniel's attention kept drifting to me. As the evening wound down, the parents moved their conversation to the back patio, taking their wine and continuing their discussion about Dad's new cases. Jake had gotten absorbed in some work emails on his phone. He was always doing that, checking his phone even during family time, which usually annoyed me, but tonight I was grateful for the distraction. It left Daniel and me essentially alone in the living room, with just the soft murmur of conversation drifting in from outside and the warm glow of the table lamps creating this intimate atmosphere. "So," Daniel said, settling back in his chair and looking at me with those incredible green eyes, "tell me something real about yourself. Not the polite dinner party version, the real version." The question caught me off guard. Most people, especially people I'd just met, stuck to safe topics. But there was something about the way he asked it, like he genuinely wanted to know, that made me want to open up. Real version. I laughed nervously. That might be dangerous territory. "I like dangerous territory," he said with a smile that made my stomach flip. "Come on. What's something you want that you've never told anyone?" I looked over at Jake, still absorbed in his phone, then back at Daniel. There was something about this moment, about the way he was looking at me like I was the most interesting person in the world, that made me want to be brave. "I want to travel," I said quietly. "Not just like a vacation to Florida or whatever. I want to see the world. I want to get lost in European cities and eat street food in Thailand and watch the sunrise over the Swiss Alps. I want to have adventures and stories and experiences that change me, you know? But everyone thinks it's impractical. My parents want me to focus on my career, Jake thinks it's a waste of money, and maybe they're right, but..." I trailed off, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "But what?" Daniel prompted gently. "But sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating," I admitted. "Like I'm living this life that's perfectly fine and perfectly safe, and I should be grateful for it, but it doesn't feel like mine. Does that make sense?" Daniel leaned forward in his chair, his eyes intense. "It makes perfect sense. You know what I think? I think most people are so afraid of taking risks that they convince themselves wanting more is selfish or unrealistic. But life is short, and it's yours to live. No one else can live it for you." The way he said it, with such conviction, made my heart race. "Easy for you to say," I said, but not unkindly. "You've actually been to all those places." "You're right," he said. "I've been incredibly privileged. But that doesn't make your dreams less valid. It just means you'll have to work harder for them, and honestly, that might make them even more meaningful when you get there." We talked for another hour, our voices low and intimate. He told me about backpacking through Southeast Asia after college, about getting food poisoning in Vietnam, and having the most incredible conversation with an elderly woman who spoke no English, but somehow communicated more in gestures and smiles than most people do with words. I told him about my secret Pinterest board full of travel photos and my pathetic savings account that I titled Someday Fund. "What's stopping you?" he asked. "Really? What's stopping you from booking a flight tomorrow?" "Everything," I laughed, but it came out a little bitter. "Money, responsibility. Jake would think I'd lost my mind. My parents would worry." "Those are all external things," Daniel said. "What about you? What do you want?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning, because I knew he wasn't just asking about travel anymore. He was asking about everything, my life, my choices, my heart. And the answer was sitting right in front of me, looking at me like I was worth risking everything for. I started, then stopped, because what I wanted in that moment was him. I wanted to know what it would feel like to kiss him, to have his hands in my hair, to throw caution to the wind and follow this incredible connection wherever it led. But I couldn't say that. I had a boyfriend. I was supposed to be happy with my safe, predictable life. "You want what?" he asked softly, and I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what I was thinking. "I want to feel alive," I whispered, and the words hung between us like a confession. Just then, Jake looked up from his phone and seemed to notice for the first time that Daniel and I had been having this intense, private conversation. "What are you guys talking about over there?" he asked with a forced casualness that didn't quite hide his unease. "Travel," Daniel said smoothly, not breaking eye contact with me. I was just telling her about some of the places I've been. But something had shifted in the room. Jake could feel it, I could tell. He put his phone away and came over to sit next to me on the couch, wrapping his arm around me in a way that felt more possessive than affectionate. And Daniel watched it all with those perceptive eyes, and I knew that he understood exactly what was happening. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and stolen glances. Every time Daniel spoke, I found myself hanging on his words. Every time he laughed, I felt this flutter in my chest. And every time Jake squeezed my hand or kissed my temple, I felt like I was betraying someone. Though whether it was Jake or Daniel or myself, I couldn't say. When it came time for everyone to leave, there was this awkward moment at the door where we all stood around saying our goodbyes. Richard was thanking my parents for their hospitality, and Dad was talking about setting up another dinner soon. Daniel shook hands with Jake, and I watched as they sized each other up in that way men do. Jake's handshake was probably a little too firm, his smile a little too bright. Daniel was polite but distant, and I could see that he'd picked up on Jake's territorial behavior. And then Daniel turned to me. "It was wonderful meeting you," he said, and when he took my hand to shake it, that electricity was there again, stronger than ever. "I hope we get the chance to talk again soon." "Me too," I managed to say, and I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. After they left, Jake was quiet during the drive back to my apartment. I could feel him thinking, processing what had happened during the evening. Finally, as we pulled into my parking lot, he said, "That Daniel guy seemed intense." "Did he?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice came out a little too high. "Yeah. And he was pretty focused on you during dinner. Did you notice that?" My heart started pounding. I think he was just being polite. Jake turned off the engine and looked at me. "Babe, I'm not stupid. The guy was basically undressing you with his eyes all night." "That's ridiculous," I said, but even as I said it, I knew he was right. Daniel had been looking at me like that, and I'd been looking right back. "Is it?" Jake asked. "Because you seemed pretty interested in what he had to say. You barely talked to me all evening." The accusation stung because it was true. I was just being social. "Your parents taught you to be polite to guests, didn't they?" "There's being polite, and then there's whatever that was," Jake said, and his voice had an edge to it that I'd never heard before. "You were flirting with him." I was not flirting, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Maybe I hadn't been obviously flirting, but there had definitely been something happening between Daniel and me. Something that went way beyond polite conversation. Jake stared at me for a long moment, and I could see hurt and confusion and anger all warring in his expression. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. "With us, I mean. Are you happy?" The question caught me completely off guard, because the honest answer was, I didn't know. A few hours ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Jake was good to me. He loved me. We had a comfortable, stable relationship. But after spending one evening talking to Daniel, after feeling that spark of connection and possibility, I wasn't sure anymore. "Of course I'm happy," I said, but it sounded hollow even to me. Jake must have heard it too, because his face fell. That wasn't very convincing. We sat there in the car for what felt like forever, both of us knowing that something fundamental had shifted, but neither of us wanting to be the first to say it out loud. Finally, Jake sighed and said, "I should go. It's late." He walked me to my door like he always did, kissed me goodnight like he always did, told me he loved me like he always did. But something was different. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there that morning, a question mark hanging over everything we'd built together. After he left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. Every word Daniel had said, every look he'd given me, every second of that electric connection I'd felt with him. I kept telling myself it was just a crush, just some silly attraction to a handsome stranger that would fade by morning. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Daniel had seen something in me that I'd forgotten was there. He'd made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in, maybe ever. And that scared the hell out of me. 3 weeks passed, and I threw myself into trying to forget about Daniel Matthews. I worked extra hours at the office, planned elaborate date nights with Jake, called my mom more often, anything to keep my mind occupied. But it was like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The harder I tried to push Daniel out of my thoughts, the more present he became. Jake and I were trying to get back to normal, but there was this weird tension between us now. He was being extra attentive, bringing me flowers for no reason, suggesting weekend trips we couldn't really afford. It was sweet, but it also felt desperate, like he was trying to compete with someone who wasn't even there. And I was overcompensating too, being extra affectionate, laughing a little too hard at his jokes, trying to convince both of us that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. I caught myself daydreaming about Daniel at work, wondering what he was doing where he was. I'd made the mistake of looking him up on social media, and his Instagram was full of photos from his travels, his work, his incredibly sophisticated life. There was one photo of him at some charity gala, looking devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo, and I stared at it for way too long before forcing myself to close the app. Then came that Saturday afternoon that changed everything again. I was at the farmer's market downtown, picking up ingredients for dinner. Jake was playing golf with his buddies, and I decided to try cooking something special for when he got back, my attempt at being the perfect girlfriend. I was debating between 2 different types of heirloom tomatoes when I heard someone say my name. I turn around, and there he was. Daniel, looking impossibly handsome in jeans and a green sweater that made his eyes look even more incredible than I remembered. He had a canvas bag slung over his shoulder and was holding a cup of coffee, and when he smiled at me, my heart literally skipped a beat. "Hey," he said, and his voice was warm and familiar, like we'd been talking just yesterday instead of 3 weeks ago. "Fancy running into you here." "Hi," I managed to say, suddenly very aware of how I looked. I was wearing old jeans and a college sweatshirt, my hair was in a messy ponytail, and I was pretty sure I didn't have any makeup on. Next to his effortless sophistication, I felt like a complete mess. "You look beautiful," he said, as if he could read my thoughts, and the sincerity in his voice made my cheeks burn. "I look like I just rolled out of bed," I said, but I was smiling despite myself. "Best look there is," he said with a grin that made my stomach do somersaults. "So, what are you shopping for?" "Let me guess, something amazing that you're going to turn into the perfect meal?" I laughed and held up my basket, which contained exactly 3 items: tomatoes, basil, and a loaf of bread. I'm clearly a culinary genius. Simple ingredients, incredible results. "That's the mark of a true chef," he said, and somehow he made buying groceries sound like the most fascinating thing in the world. We started walking through the market together, and it felt so natural, so easy. Daniel knew about the different vendors, recommended the best places for cheese and fresh pasta, told me stories about markets he'd visited in Italy and France. He bought us both fresh lemonade from this woman who remembered him by name, and we sat on a bench in the little park adjacent to the market. "So, how have you been?" he asked, and the way he looked at me made it clear he really wanted to know. "Good," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I've been thinking about what you said that night at dinner. About wanting more, about not settling for safe. And I think you were right. I think I have been settling. Not just with." I paused, realizing I was about to talk about my relationship with someone who wasn't Jake. Not just with some things, but with everything. My job, my life, my dreams. I've been playing it so safe that I've forgotten what it feels like to want something badly enough to risk failure. Daniel leaned forward, his attention completely focused on me. "What do you want? Really want?" It was the same question he'd asked me that night, but this time we were alone, without the pressure of family dinner and boyfriends and social expectations. This time, I could be completely honest. I want to write, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I've always wanted to be a writer, but it seems so impractical, so unrealistic. Everyone always said I should get a real job first, build some security, and then maybe pursue writing as a hobby. But what if I never get around to it? What if I spend so much time building this safe, practical life that I forget who I really am? Daniel was quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd said too much, revealed too much. But then he smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. What kind of writing? He asked. Stories. About people and relationships, and the moments that change everything. I want to write about real life, but the parts of real life that feel magical. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, he said. Have you written anything recently? I laughed, but it came out a little bitter. I started a novel last year, but Jake said it was taking up too much of my time. We were supposed to be planning our future together, and I was spending every evening hunched over my laptop, writing about imaginary people. He wasn't wrong, I was obsessed with it. I would lose track of time completely, forget to eat dinner, stay up until 2 in the morning because I couldn't stop writing. But it felt alive. It felt like the most real thing I'd ever done. What happened to it? The novel? It's still there, half-finished, saved on my computer. Sometimes I open the document and read what I wrote, and it's like reading something written by a different person. Someone braver than I am now. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me with those perceptive eyes. Finally, he said, "You know what I think? I think that person is still there. I think you're still brave. You just need to remember how." The way he said it, with such conviction, made me believe it might actually be true. We sat there for a while, talking about books and stories and dreams, and I felt more like myself than I had in months. Daniel had this way of listening that made me feel heard, really heard, for the first time in so long. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Jake, asking when I'd be home, and reality came crashing back. "I should go," I said, standing up reluctantly. But Daniel caught my hand, and that electric feeling shot through me again, stronger than ever. "Wait," he said, and his voice was urgent, almost desperate. "I need to tell you something." I sat back down, my heart hammering in my chest. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said, and his honesty was like a punch to the gut. "Since that night at your parents' house, you're all I think about. The way you laugh, the way you light up when you talk about something you're passionate about, the way you see the world. I know you have a boyfriend. I know this is complicated, but I couldn't let you walk away without telling you how I feel." I stared at him, speechless. Part of me wanted to run, to pretend this conversation had never happened, to go home to Jake and our safe, uncomplicated relationship. But a bigger part of me was singing with joy because this incredible man felt the same connection I did. "Daniel," I started, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. But I also want you to know that if things were different, if you were free to choose, I would do everything in my power to show you the world. Not just travel, though we could do that too. I would show you what it feels like to be with someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves what they see. I would support your writing, celebrate your dreams, be your partner in every adventure." Tears were running down my face now, and I didn't even try to stop them. Because everything he was saying was everything I'd ever wanted to hear, and I was realizing that I'd never heard it before. Jake loved me, I knew he did, but he loved the version of me that fit into his life plan. Daniel was talking about loving all of me, even the parts that were inconvenient or impractical or risky. "I care about you too," I whispered. "More than I should, more than I have any right to. But I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything," Daniel said gently. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just want you to know that you have choices. You always have choices, even when it doesn't feel like it." He stood up then, and I thought he was going to leave, but instead he leaned down and kissed my forehead, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Think about what you want," he said. "Not what you should want, not what other people want for you, but what you want. And if you decide that what you want includes me, you know where to find me." Then he walked away, leaving me sitting on that bench with tears on my face, and my world completely turned upside down. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Jake, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. When I finally got home, Jake was waiting for me on the couch, still in his golf clothes. He took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, immediately concerned. "You look like you've been crying." I couldn't lie to him. Not about this. Not anymore. "I ran into Daniel at the farmer's market," I said quietly. Jake's expression changed instantly. And we talked. I sat down across from him, putting distance between us because I knew what was coming. "Jake, we need to talk." "Really talk?" "About what?" "About how you're obviously attracted to some guy you barely know. About how you've been different ever since that dinner 3 weeks ago." His voice was rising, hurt and anger bleeding through. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't notice that you've been somewhere else, even when you're right here with me?" "You're right," I said, and the admission hung between us like a bomb. "You're absolutely right. I have been different. And I'm sorry, because you deserve better than someone who's not fully present in this relationship." Jake stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I was really saying. "Are you breaking up with me?" The question I'd been dreading, but also the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm so confused, Jake. I care about you, I do, but you're in love with him." It wasn't a question, and the quiet certainty in his voice broke my heart. Because he was right, even though I hadn't admitted it to myself until that moment. I was in love with Daniel Matthews. Completely, desperately, irrevocably in love with a man I'd spent maybe 5 hours with total. "I think I might be," I whispered, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff. Jake was quiet for a long time, just looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before, hurt and understanding and disappointment all mixed together. Finally, he said, "I've been waiting for you to love me the way I love you for 8 months. I kept thinking that if I was patient enough, if I was good enough, you'd eventually feel for me what I feel for you. But you never did you?" The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. "Jake." "It's okay," he said, but his voice was thick with unshed tears. "I mean, it's not okay, it hurts like hell, but I understand. You can't force feelings that aren't there. I just wish you'd figured it out before I fell so hard for you." We both cried then, holding each other one last time, mourning what we'd had and what we'd never have. Jake was a good man, and he deserved someone who would love him with their whole heart. I wasn't that person, and we both knew it now. He left that night, taking his things from my apartment, and I was alone with the biggest decision of my life. I could play it safe, try to win Jake back, settle for a relationship that was comfortable but not passionate. Or I could take the biggest risk of my life and see what might happen with Daniel. But first, I had something else I needed to do. I opened my laptop and found the document I hadn't touched in months, my half-finished novel. I read the first few pages, and Daniel was right. It was good. It was really good. And the person who wrote it was braver than I'd given her credit for. I started typing, and the words flowed like water, like they'd been waiting for me to come back to them. I wrote until dawn, pouring everything into the story. My confusion, my longing, my fear, my hope. And when the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. 3 days later, I was standing outside Daniel's law firm, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I'd spent those 3 days writing, thinking, and making the scariest decision of my life. I'd quit my job, actually quit, not just threatened to, and I'd started researching writing programs and freelance opportunities. I'd opened a new savings account and titled it New Life Fund. But most importantly, I'd chosen love over safety, possibility over certainty, and myself over everyone else's expectations. Daniel was just leaving the building when he saw me standing there. His face lit up with surprise and something that looked like hope. "Hi," I said, suddenly nervous. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "I have all the time in the world," he said, and the way he looked at me made me feel like I could fly. "I broke up with Jake," I said, getting straight to the point. "And I quit my job. And I started writing again." And I think I might be completely crazy, but I can't stop thinking about what you said about choices and taking risks and living the life I actually want instead of the life I think I should want. Daniel stepped closer, and I could see my own emotions reflected in his eyes, hope and fear and overwhelming possibility. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Because once we do this, once we start down this path together, everything changes. Your life, my life, everything. I'm terrified, I admitted. But I'm also more sure than I've ever been about anything. I want to see what happens when I choose the thing that scares me and excites me in equal measure. I want to choose you if you'll have me. Daniel reached for my hands, and when our fingers intertwined, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at the same time. I'll have you, he said, and then he was kissing me, right there on the sidewalk in front of his office building, and it was everything I'd imagined and more. It was passionate and tender and desperate and perfect, and I knew in that moment that I'd made the right choice. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless and laughing, Daniel said, "So what now?" I smiled, feeling braver and more alive than I ever had before. Now we figured out together. All of it. The writing, the traveling, the life we want to build. We figure it out as we go. I like the sound of that, he said, and kissed me again. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Prague, working on my novel while Daniel was in meetings with international clients. My first freelance article had been published in a travel magazine, and I had assignments lined up for the next 3 months. We were planning to spend the summer in Italy, where Daniel was considering opening a European branch of his practice, and I was researching a book about small-town Italian communities. It wasn't always easy. Long-distance love never is, even when you're traveling together. We had fights about money and plans and the future. I had moments of panic where I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake, if I'd thrown away stability for a fantasy. But then Daniel would look at me the way he had that first night at dinner, like I was worth risking everything for, and I'd remember why I'd chosen this path. My mom calls every week, still not entirely sure what to make of my new life, but slowly coming around. "You sound happy," she said during our last conversation. "Really happy, in a way you never did before." Dad's proud of my writing career, even if he doesn't entirely understand it. And Jake? We haven't spoken since that night, but I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, someone who loves him the way he deserves to be loved. I'm happy for him. As for Daniel and me, we're still figuring it out, still choosing each other every day, still building something beautiful and complicated and real. He reads everything I write and tells me I'm brilliant even when I think it's garbage. I listen to his dreams about changing the legal world and believe in him completely. We travel together, we fight together, we dream together. And sometimes, when we're lying in bed in some new city, planning our next adventure, I think about that family dinner that started it all. How a single evening, a chance encounter, a moment of recognition between two souls can change absolutely everything. How love, real love, isn't safe or comfortable or predictable. It's brave and wild and worth every risk you take to find it. That's the thing about love triangles I've learned. They're not really about choosing between two people. They're about choosing between two versions of yourself, the safe version and the brave version. The version that settles and the version that soars. I chose to soar, and I've never looked back.